Christmas dinner was supposed to be perfect. Instead, it became the night that exposed 28 years of family lies, financial betrayal, and a secret that would destroy everything I thought I knew about the woman I was going to marry. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I always knew I was different. From my younger brother Tyler, while he was the charming athlete who could talk his way out of any situation, I was the quiet one who actually got things done. My name is Marcus Chen, and at 32, I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove myself worthy of my family's attention. My parents. David and Patricia Chen immigrated from Taiwan in the early 80s and built a successful accounting firm from nothing. They worked 16-hour days for decades, missing soccer games and school plays, always promising that their sacrifices would pay off for Tyler and me. What they really meant was that their sacrifices would pay off for Tyler. Specifically, the favoritism started early and never stopped. When Tyler was 8 and I was 10, we both wanted to play Little League Baseball. My parents signed Tyler up immediately, but told me they couldn't afford the registration fees when I offered to pay for it myself with money I'd saved from doing chores. They said I was being selfish and should support my brother instead. Tyler lasted 3 weeks before quitting because practice was too early in the morning. By high school, the pattern was set in stone. Tyler was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the responsible one who handled everything quietly. When Tyler crashed his car senior year after a party, my parents covered the insurance deductible and bought him a newer vehicle. When I graduated valedictorian, they missed the ceremony because Tyler had a basketball game that same night. He rode the bench for the entire season. But apparently that was more important than my academic achievement. College only made things worse. I earned a full scholarship to Oregon State for engineering, but Tyler barely scraped by with grades that wouldn't get him into community college. No problem. My parents drained their savings to send him to a private university in California, where he could find himself. He changed majors 4 times, took 6 years to graduate with a degree in communications, and came home with $30,000 in additional debt that my parents immediately paid off. Meanwhile, I worked part-time jobs throughout college, graduated with honors, and landed a position at a tech startup in Seattle. I moved out of state, built my career, and tried to create some distance from the family dynamics that had shaped my entire childhood. For 5 years, I threw myself into work, climbing from junior developer to senior software engineer at a company that specialized in healthcare data management. The money was good, really good. By 28, I was making 6 figures and had saved enough to buy a small house in a decent neighborhood outside Seattle. I was finally independent, successful, and far enough from Portland that I could choose when and how to engage with my family's drama. Tyler, meanwhile, had returned home. After college and was living in my parents' basement, he worked a series of part-time jobs: retail clerk, coffee shop barista, restaurant server, never staying anywhere longer than 6 months. He always had an excuse why each job wasn't right for him, and my parents always supported whatever decision he made. When he announced he was going to become a personal trainer, they paid for his certification courses. When he decided fitness wasn't his calling, they funded his attempt at starting a food blog that lasted exactly 2 months. My sister Jessica, who's 26 and 2 years younger than Tyler, saw through the favoritism just like I did. She's a veterinarian who paid her own way through school and residency, working at animal clinics and pet stores to cover her expenses. Jessica and I started having monthly video calls after I moved to Seattle, partly to stay connected and partly to vent about the family dysfunction we'd both experienced. "You know what pisses me off most?" Jessica said during one of our calls last spring. "Mom and Dad act like Tyler's some kind of entrepreneurial genius when he's basically a professional failure. But they treat our actual careers like hobbies they have to tolerate." She wasn't wrong. When I got promoted to lead engineer and received a substantial raise, my parents' reaction was lukewarm. Congratulations followed by immediate questions about whether I could help Tyler with his rent. No. When Jessica opened her own veterinary practice, they spent the entire dinner talking about Tyler's latest business idea, selling workout supplements online. The supplement venture lasted 3 months and cost my parents $8,000 in startup funding. Tyler claimed the market was too saturated and moved on to his next brilliant plan, becoming a social media influencer. He bought professional lighting equipment, a high-end camera, and editing software, all with money borrowed from our parents. His YouTube channel about lifestyle optimization attracted exactly 47 subscribers before he gave up and decided to try day trading instead. My parents' enabling reached new levels of absurdity with the trading experiment. They gave Tyler $10,000 to invest, which he lost in 2 weeks betting on cryptocurrency. When he asked for more money to recover his losses, they actually considered it. I only found out about this because Jessica called me in a panic after overhearing their conversation. "Marcus, you need to talk to them," she said. "They're going to drain their retirement account funding Tyler's gambling addiction." I drove down from Seattle that weekend and had what I thought was a productive conversation with my parents. I explained that day trading wasn't a career and that continuing to bail Tyler out was preventing him from learning responsibility. They nodded and agreed, promised they wouldn't give him any more money for trading, and asked me to stay out of their financial decisions. 2 weeks later, Tyler posted photos from an expensive restaurant on Instagram, celebrating his big win. In the stock market, when I called my parents to ask what happened, they sheepishly admitted they'd given him another $5,000 because he'd promised this time would be different. He'd lost most of it within days. But they made me promise not to say anything because Tyler was going through a rough patch. This was the environment I'd grown up in. Tyler could do no wrong. Consequences didn't apply to him, and anyone who questioned the system was being unsupportive. It had taken me years of therapy to understand that this wasn't normal family dynamics, and even longer to stop seeking their approval for my life choices. The irony was that Tyler and I actually got along fine when our parents weren't around. He wasn't malicious or cruel, just incredibly spoiled and completely unprepared for adult responsibility. During family gatherings, he'd sometimes acknowledge how lucky he was to have such understanding parents, but he never seemed to grasp that. His luck came at the expense of Jessica and me. My career continued to flourish despite the family drama. 2 years ago, I was recruited by a larger tech company in Seattle with an even better salary and stock options. The move came with a significant raise and the opportunity to lead a team of developers working on medical software that would actually help people. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That's when I met Rebecca Martinez at a professional networking event downtown. She was a marketing director for a biotech company, presenting on digital strategies for healthcare startups. She was smart, funny, and had this way of cutting through corporate nonsense that reminded me of Jessica's directness. We started talking after her presentation and ended up having dinner that same night. Rebecca had grown up in Phoenix as the eldest of 3 daughters in a Mexican-American family that valued education and hard work. Her parents were both teachers who'd saved every penny to send their kids to college. She'd earned her MBA while working full-time and had built her career through merit and determination, not family connections or financial safety nets. Dating Rebecca was refreshing after years of being around people who made excuses for Tyler's behavior. She had clear boundaries, high standards, and zero tolerance for manipulation or laziness. Without judgment, but also didn't hesitate to point out how toxic the favoritism had been. "Your parents created a monster," she said one evening over dinner, "and they've been enabling him for so long that they probably don't even see it anymore. The question is whether you're going to keep participating in the cycle." Rebecca's perspective helped me understand that I'd been unconsciously seeking my parents' approval my entire life. Even after moving away and building my own success, every achievement, every promotion, every milestone was partly motivated by a desire to prove that I deserved the same love and support they'd always given Tyler freely. After 18 months of dating, I knew Rebecca was the person I wanted to marry. She was everything I'd hoped to find in a partner: intelligent, ambitious, honest, and completely unimpressed by my family's dysfunction. She treated me like an equal, challenged me to be better, and never made me feel like I had to earn her affection. I proposed to Rebecca on a hiking trail outside Seattle, where we'd had our first weekend trip together. She said yes, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something that belonged entirely to me. We started planning a wedding for the following fall, and Rebecca was excited about the idea of meeting my extended family and learning more about my background. The engagement announcement to my parents went exactly as expected. They were polite, but not enthusiastic. Asked a few basic questions about Rebecca's job and family, and then immediately shifted the conversation to Tyler's latest venture. He'd decided to become a real estate agent, and they were helping him pay for licensing classes and a professional wardrobe. Jessica, on the other hand, was thrilled. She'd met Rebecca during a weekend visit to Seattle and immediately understood why I'd fallen for her. "She's perfect for you," Jessica said during one of our calls. "She's not going to put up with mom and dad's bullshit, and she's not going to let Tyler walk all over you anymore." The wedding planning process revealed just how different Rebecca's family was from mine. Her parents were genuinely excited about the engagement and immediately started making plans to visit Seattle. They asked thoughtful questions about our relationship, shared stories about their own marriage, treated the wedding as a celebration of our future together rather than an obligation to endure. My parents, meanwhile, seemed to view the wedding as an inconvenience that would interfere with Tyler's needs. When we discussed dates, they worried about whether it would conflict with Tyler's real estate licensing exam. When we talked about the guest list, they wanted to make sure Tyler could bring a date even though he wasn't seeing anyone seriously. When Rebecca mentioned her family's traditions, they seemed annoyed that they'd have to participate in anything that wasn't familiar to them. Tyler's reaction to the engagement was typically self-centered. He congratulated me briefly, then immediately started talking about his own dating life and how he was focusing on his career right now instead of relationships. He made a few comments about how expensive weddings were and how he'd probably just do something small when his time came, as if he were doing us a favor by not demanding an elaborate celebration. What I didn't realize was that Rebecca had been quietly observing my family dynamics during our visits to Portland. She'd noticed the way my parents lit up when Tyler entered a room, how they hung on his every word, and how they seemed to barely tolerate my presence despite my obvious success. She'd seen how they dismissed my achievements while celebrating Tyler's most mundane accomplishments. More importantly, she'd started to notice things about Tyler that I'd been blind to my entire life. The way he looked at her during family dinners, how he always found excuses to be around when she was visiting, and how he seemed to compete with me for her attention in subtle ways that I'd dismissed as normal sibling rivalry. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As we got closer to Christmas, Rebecca seemed increasingly uncomfortable during our visits to Portland. She'd become quieter around my family, more observant. Sometimes seemed like she was studying everyone's behavior rather than just enjoying the time together. When I asked her about it, she'd say everything was fine and change the subject. The Christmas dinner invitation came in November, with my mother insisting that it was crucial for Rebecca to experience a traditional Chen family celebration before we got married. She'd been planning the menu for weeks and had invited my father's brother and his family, plus my mother's sister and her kids, what she described as the most important holiday gathering in years. Rebecca agreed to attend, but I could tell she was dreading it. She'd started asking more pointed questions about Tyler's relationship history, whether he'd ever been seriously involved with anyone, and why he seemed so interested in our wedding plans. I dismissed her concerns as pre-wedding stress and assured her that Tyler was harmless, just immature and self-absorbed, not dangerous. The week before Christmas, Tyler called me with unusual excitement in his voice. He'd been working as a real estate agent for 6 months and claimed he was finally hitting his stride. He'd closed 2 small sales and was convinced he'd found his calling. More importantly, he said he had big news to share at Christmas dinner and wanted to make sure Rebecca would be there to hear it, I assumed. He'd gotten his first major commission, or maybe decided to move out of our parents' house. It never occurred to me that Tyler's big news would be connected to Rebecca, or that Christmas dinner would become the night that changed everything. I thought I knew about my life. The drive from Seattle to Portland on Christmas Eve should have been relaxing. Rebecca and I had packed carefully, bringing thoughtful gifts for everyone and a bottle of expensive wine that Rebecca had researched specifically to pair with my mother's traditional Christmas menu. Instead, the 3-hour journey felt tense in ways I couldn't quite identify. Rebecca spent most of the drive staring out the window at the rain-soaked Pacific Northwest landscape, occasionally making small talk about work or wedding plans, but never quite engaging in the deeper conversations we usually had during long car rides. When I asked if she was nervous about the family dinner, she gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said she was just tired from the busy season at her company. Your mom really went all out with the invitations, Rebecca said as we crossed the Columbia River. She called it the most important Christmas dinner in years. That's a lot of pressure. I laughed it off, explaining that my mother had always been dramatic about holiday celebrations. What I didn't mention was that Patricia Chen had never described any previous Christmas dinner as particularly important, and I'd been wondering what made this year different. My best guess was that she wanted to impress Rebecca's family, who were flying in from Phoenix to meet my parents for the first time. Rebecca's parents, Carlos and Maria Martinez, had arrived in Portland 2 days earlier and were staying at a hotel downtown. It insisted on paying for their own accommodations despite my parents' polite offers to host them. I'd spent the previous evening having dinner with them, and their warmth and genuine interest in our relationship had reminded me how different families could be. Your parents raised an incredible daughter, Carlos had told me over dessert. Maria and I are so happy that Rebecca found someone who appreciates her ambition and supports her dreams. The contrast with my own parents was stark. While the Martinez family celebrated Rebecca's career achievements and treated our engagement as a joyful milestone, my parents seemed to view the wedding as an obligation they had to endure. They'd been polite during their brief meeting with Carlos and Maria, but I could tell they were more focused on Tyler's reaction to having strangers in his space than on getting to know their future. Daughter-in-law's family, Tyler had been unusually present during the Martinez family's visit, hovering around conversations and inserting himself into discussions about wedding plans with an enthusiasm that seemed out of character. He'd offered to give Carlos and Maria a tour of Portland, suggested restaurants for them to try, and even volunteered to help with transportation to the airport when they left. Rebecca had noticed his behavior and mentioned it to me privately. Does Tyler always get this involved in your relationships? She'd asked, after he'd spent 20 minutes explaining Portland's craft beer scene to her father. I'd dismissed it as Tyler trying to make a good impression, but Rebecca's question had stuck with me. Tyler had never shown much interest in my previous girlfriends, and his sudden investment in our wedding planning seemed inconsistent with his usual self-absorbed behavior. The Chen family house looked festive when we arrived on Christmas Eve. My mother had decorated extensively, with lights strung around the exterior and a wreath on the front door that must have cost more than I'd spent on decorations for my entire apartment. The smell of her traditional Christmas cookies filled the air, and I could hear holiday music playing from the kitchen. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said as we carried our bags inside. "Your mom really knows how to create a celebration." Tyler appeared immediately, emerging from the basement with an energy level that seemed unusually high, even for him. He hugged Rebecca longer than necessary and complimented her dress, her hair, and the wine we'd brought with such enthusiasm that I found myself wondering if he'd been drinking already. "Rebecca, you look amazing," he said, stepping back to examine her outfit. "That color is perfect on you. Marcus is so lucky." Something about his tone bothered me, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Rebecca thanked him politely and moved toward the kitchen to greet my parents. But Tyler continued following our conversation, asking about our drive and making comments about how exciting it was to have everyone together for such a special Christmas. My parents' greeting was typically reserved. They hugged Rebecca briefly, complimented her appearance, and immediately began discussing logistics for the next day's dinner. Patricia had been cooking for 3 days straight, preparing enough food to feed twice as many people as were actually coming. She rattled off the menu with pride, explaining how each dish held special significance for our family's Christmas traditions. "I want everything to be perfect for Rebecca's family," she said. First impressions are so important, and I want them to understand how much we value this relationship. The emphasis on Rebecca's family seemed odd, given that my parents had barely made an effort to connect with the Martinez family during their brief visit. I suspected the elaborate dinner was more about appearing impressive than actually building relationships. But I kept that observation to myself. Christmas Eve dinner was a smaller affair, with just the immediate family. Tyler dominated the conversation, talking about his recent success in real estate and his plans for expanding his business in the coming year. It apparently closed 3 deals in December and was convinced that 2024 would be his breakthrough year in the industry. I'm thinking about specializing in luxury properties, he announced over dessert. The commission structure is so much better, and I really connect with high-end clients. They appreciate someone who understands their lifestyle. Tyler had been working in real estate for less than a year and had sold primarily starter homes and small condos, but my parents listened to his plans with the same admiration they'd shown for all his previous career changes. They asked detailed questions about his strategies, offered suggestions for marketing approaches, and promised to refer potential clients to him. When the conversation briefly shifted to Rebecca's work, Tyler found ways to redirect attention back to himself. When she mentioned a successful campaign her company had launched, he immediately started talking about his own marketing ideas for real estate. When she discussed her promotion timeline, he launched into his plans for eventually starting his own real estate firm. Rebecca handled Tyler's interruptions with grace, but I could see her frustration building. She'd dealt with self-absorbed colleagues before, but Tyler's complete inability to engage with anyone else's achievements was extreme. Even by her standards, she started giving me meaningful looks across the table, silently asking if I was noticing what she was seeing after dinner. While my parents were cleaning up, Tyler suggested that he and Rebecca and I should go for a walk around the neighborhood to see the Christmas lights. It was a tradition he'd apparently just invented, since we'd never done anything like it before. But he seemed genuinely excited about the idea. "Come on, it'll be fun," he said. "Some of the houses around here really go all out for Christmas. Rebecca should see what a Portland Christmas looks like." We bundled up and walked through the residential streets, with Tyler providing commentary. On every decoration and house we passed, he seemed to know personal details about several neighbors, their families, their Christmas traditions, that suggested he'd been spending more time at home than I'd realized. "This is really nice," Rebecca said as we admired a particularly elaborate light display. "I love how each house has its own personality." Tyler beamed at her compliment and immediately launched into a detailed explanation of Pacific Northwest Christmas traditions, most of which he seemed to be making up on the spot. He talked about local tree farms, regional holiday foods, and seasonal activities with the authority of someone who'd been studying Portland culture for years rather than someone who'd barely left his parents' basement. What struck me most was how Tyler's attention seemed entirely focused on Rebecca rather than on sharing the experience with both of us. He walked slightly ahead, turning back to address his comments directly to her, and seemed to forget I was there unless I specifically inserted myself into the conversation, Tyler said. As we headed back toward the house, I've been thinking about how different this Christmas feels, with Rebecca being part of the family. It's like everything is more special, more meaningful. Rebecca thanked him for the sentiment, but I could see her discomfort growing. Tyler's intensity was becoming impossible to ignore, and his comments about her being part of the family seemed premature, given that we hadn't even set a wedding date yet. Back at the house, my parents were finishing the last of the dinner preparations for the next day. The kitchen was filled with covered dishes, prepared ingredients, and the organized chaos that Patricia Chen created whenever she was hosting a large gathering. Tyler immediately began helping, showing more domestic responsibility than I'd seen from him in years. "Mom, what else can I do?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. "I want tomorrow to be perfect." His enthusiasm for helping with family events was completely out of character. Tyler had historically avoided household responsibilities, claiming that he was too busy with work or that he didn't know how to help properly. Seeing him voluntarily washing dishes and organizing serving platters was surreal. "Tyler's been such a help with all the planning," Patricia said, beaming with pride. "He's really stepped up this year." I think he's finally maturing." Rebecca and I exchanged glances. In the 18 months we'd been together, Tyler had never shown this level of investment in family events. His sudden transformation into the helpful son seemed to coincide perfectly with Rebecca's presence in our lives. That night, as Rebecca and I were getting ready for bed in my childhood bedroom, she finally voiced what I'd been sensing all evening. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Has Tyler always been this interested in your relationships?" I paused, thinking back through my dating history. Tyler had been polite to my previous girlfriends, but never particularly engaged. He'd never offered to give tours to their families, never volunteered to help with relationship milestones, and certainly never shown this level of enthusiasm for holiday celebrations. "Not really," I admitted. "He's usually pretty focused on his own stuff." "Why?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "I might be overthinking this, but some of his behavior tonight felt ... intense. The way he looks at me, comments about me being part of the family, the sudden interest in helping with Christmas. It's like he's performing for my benefit." Wanted to dismiss her concerns, but Tyler's behavior had been noticeably different. His attention to Rebecca went beyond normal politeness or family friendship. There was an underlying current of something I couldn't quite identify, something that made me uncomfortable without being able to articulate why. "He's probably just excited about the wedding," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced by my own explanation. "Tyler's always been dramatic about big events." Rebecca nodded, but I could tell she wasn't satisfied with my answer. She kissed me goodnight and settled into bed, but I could feel her tension even as she tried to sleep. Whatever she was sensing about Tyler's behavior was serious enough to keep her awake, and her concern was starting to affect my own comfort level. Christmas morning brought a flurry of activity as the extended family began arriving for dinner. My Uncle Richard and his wife Linda came with their 2 teenage sons, both of whom immediately gravitated toward Tyler's gaming setup in the basement. My Aunt Susan arrived with her husband and 3 young children, who filled the house with noise and energy. Rebecca's parents arrived precisely on time, bearing gifts and looking genuinely excited about spending Christmas with my family. Carlos and Maria had dressed up for the occasion and brought thoughtful presents for everyone, including my extended family members they'd never met. Tyler was everywhere at once, greeting guests, offering drinks, helping with coats, and making sure everyone felt welcome. His social skills were on full display, and I could see my parents' pride in his performance. He was charming, attentive, and completely in his element as the charismatic host. "Your brother really knows how to work a room," Carlos observed, as we watched Tyler entertaining my young cousins. "He's got natural leadership qualities." What Carlos saw as leadership, I was beginning to recognize as something else entirely. Tyler wasn't just being social, he was performing, and his performance seemed designed to impress one specific audience member. Every joke, every helpful gesture, every moment of charm was directed toward Rebecca or calculated to make him look good in front of her family. The Christmas dinner itself was spectacular. Patricia had outdone herself with the food, the table settings, and the overall presentation. The house looked like something from a magazine, and the conversation flowed easily among the extended family members. Tyler sat directly across from Rebecca, positioning himself perfectly to dominate her attention throughout the meal. He asked thoughtful questions about her work, her family, and her interests, with a depth of curiosity that seemed out of character for someone who usually showed little interest in other people's lives. "Rebecca, you mentioned you studied abroad in college," Tyler said during the main course. "That must have been incredible. I've always wanted to travel more, but work has kept me so busy." Tyler had never expressed interest in travel before, and his busy work schedule consisted of showing houses on weekends and spending most weekdays playing video games. But his questions about Rebecca's semester in Barcelona were detailed and engaged, as if he'd been researching her background specifically to make conversation. As dinner wound down and people began moving to the living room for coffee and dessert, Tyler stood up and tapped his wine glass with a spoon. The room fell quiet, and all eyes turned to him. "I hope everyone will indulge me for just a moment," he said, his voice carrying the confident tone he used when he was about to make a sales pitch. I have some important news to share, and I wanted to tell everyone at the same time. My parents looked at each other with obvious excitement, clearly already knowing what Tyler was about to announce. The rest of the family leaned forward with interest, and Rebecca's parents smiled politely, assuming they were about to hear about a career milestone or personal achievement. Tyler reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know this might come as a surprise," he said, his eyes fixed directly on Rebecca, "but I've been planning this for months. I wanted to wait until we were all together, until it was perfect." The room went completely silent. I felt my stomach drop as I realized what was happening. But I couldn't quite process the reality of what I was seeing. Tyler dropped to one knee, opened the ring box, and looked up at Rebecca with an expression of complete sincerity. "Rebecca Martinez," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "will you marry me?" 2 years later, I'm writing this from my home office in Austin, Texas, where Rebecca and I moved after our small courthouse wedding in Seattle. The morning sun streams through windows that overlook a backyard where our German shepherd, Max, is chasing butterflies with the determined focus of someone who's never caught one, but refuses to give up trying. Rebecca's voice carries from the kitchen where she's making coffee and talking to her sister on the phone about their parents' upcoming visit. The easy warmth in her laughter reminds me how different our life became once we stopped trying to manage other people's dysfunction and started focusing on building something purely our own. The legal settlement with my parents concluded 8 months ago. They kept their house, but had to refinance it to pay back the trust funds they'd misappropriated. Tyler's share remains in trust until he turns 35 or maintains steady employment for 18 consecutive months, whichever comes first. My portion, nearly $400,000 plus accumulated interest, has allowed us to buy this house and start the consulting firm it's been dreaming about for years. Austin turned out to be the perfect place for a fresh start. The tech scene is thriving. Rebecca's marketing expertise is in high demand. We're far enough from both Portland and Phoenix that family visits require advanced planning rather than spontaneous drama. We've built a circle of friends who know us as Marcus and Rebecca, not as the people who survived that insane Christmas dinner or the couple who had to sue their own family. My consulting firm specializes in healthcare data systems, the same field I'd worked in as an employee, but now with the freedom to choose clients and projects that actually interest me. The business is growing steadily. I've hired 2 junior developers who remind me of myself at that age, ambitious, talented, and eager to prove themselves without family baggage holding them back. Rebecca's career has flourished in ways that wouldn't have been possible in Portland. She's the marketing director for a biotech startup that's developing personalized cancer treatments, work that combines her professional skills with her desire to make a meaningful impact. Her team respects her expertise, her bosses value her strategic thinking, and nobody expects her to manage anyone else's emotional needs during staff meetings. Jessica visits us quarterly, usually coordinating her trips with veterinary conferences. In Texas, she's thriving in her own practice in Portland, and recently got engaged to a pediatric surgeon she met at a medical conference. Her fiancé, David, is the opposite of Tyler, in every way responsible, supportive, and genuinely excited about Jessica's success, rather than threatened by it. "You know what I love most about David?" Jessica said during her last visit. "When I tell him about a challenging case or a business milestone, he asks follow-up questions, because he's actually interested. He doesn't immediately start talking about himself or try to one-up my achievements." The contrast with Tyler's behavior was stark, but no longer painful. We'd all learned to recognize healthy relationship dynamics by experiencing them firsthand. The education had been worth the temporary chaos it took to get there. My relationship with my father has slowly improved since he started individual therapy. He calls once a month with genuine updates about his life, asks thoughtful questions about our business and our plans, and has never once mentioned Tyler's latest crisis or my mother's opinions about our choices. He's learning to have relationships that aren't mediated through Patricia's emotional needs, and the difference is remarkable. "I spent 35 years avoiding conflict with your mother," he told me during a recent call. "I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was actually teaching you kids that fairness didn't matter, and that love was conditional on not causing trouble." That's not the father I wanted to be. His apology was specific, heartfelt, and accompanied by concrete changes in his behavior. He'd opened his own checking account, started making decisions without consulting Patricia, and begun setting boundaries with Tyler that he should have established decades ago. The progress was slow, but consistent, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations for the first time in years. Tyler's situation remains complicated. He's been working at the same retail electronics store for 14 months, the longest he's held any job since college. According to Jessica, he's living in a studio apartment, driving a used car he bought himself, and slowly learning to manage his finances without parental intervention. The Instagram posts about entrepreneurship and lifestyle optimization have been replaced by pictures of hiking trails and community college classes. 3 months ago, Tyler sent me a text message that caught me completely off guard. Saw an article about your company in a tech magazine. Sounds like you're really building something cool. Proud of you. I didn't respond immediately. The message was brief, specific, and contained no requests for money, forgiveness, or attention. It was the first communication from Tyler that seemed focused on acknowledging my achievements rather than managing his own needs. After discussing it with Rebecca, I sent back a simple reply. Thanks. Hope the new job is going well. We haven't exchanged messages since then, but the interaction felt different from our previous attempts at communication. Tyler's acknowledgement of my success was genuine, rather than performative, and his restraint in not pushing for a larger conversation suggested he might finally be learning appropriate boundaries. My mother remains the most challenging relationship to navigate. She's sent dozens of emails over the past 2 years, ranging from angry accusations to manipulative guilt trips to occasional attempts at normal family communication. I've responded to fewer than half of them, and only to the ones that addressed concrete issues rather than emotional manipulation. Her most recent email, sent last month, was different in tone. I know I handled things badly during your engagement and wedding. I was scared of losing my family and made choices that pushed you away instead of bringing us closer. I'm working with a counselor to understand why I reacted the way I did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. The email was notably free of excuses, deflection, or attempts to minimize her behavior. It didn't ask for anything specific or demand an immediate response. For the first time in my adult life, Patricia Chen had sent me a message that focused on her own growth rather than my obligations as her son. I haven't decided whether to respond, but the fact that she's capable of that kind of self-reflection suggests that change might be possible even if it's too late to repair the relationship we never really had. Rebecca and I have started talking about having children, a conversation that feels entirely different from the family planning discussions we had before the Christmas dinner incident. We're not trying to prove anything to anyone or seeking approval for our choices. We're simply two people who love each other and want to build a family based on mutual respect, emotional safety, and genuine support. I keep thinking about how different our kids' experience will be, Rebecca said recently as we watched Max chase a tennis ball in the backyard. They'll grow up knowing they're loved for who they are, not for how well they perform or how little trouble they cause. The idea of raising children without the toxic dynamics that shaped my childhood feels both exciting and slightly terrifying. We'll have to actively work to create the kind of family environment we want, rather than simply reacting to dysfunction or trying to fix other people's problems. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if Tyler had never made that proposal. If the Christmas dinner had proceeded normally, if we'd all continued pretending that the family dynamics were acceptable, Rebecca and I probably would have had a large, expensive wedding filled with people who didn't really support our relationship. We might have spent years trying to manage my parents' expectations and Tyler's emotional needs instead of building our own life together. The crisis, as painful as it was, forced everyone to confront realities we'd been avoiding for decades. Tyler had to learn that actions have consequences. My parents had to acknowledge their role in creating the dysfunction, and I had to stop seeking approval from people who were never going to provide it freely. Most importantly, the experience taught Rebecca and me that we could weather serious challenges together. We'd faced family betrayal, financial manipulation, legal battles, and social isolation. and we'd emerged stronger and more committed to each other than before. Looking back, I'm grateful for Rebecca's courage in saying we need to talk that night. Her willingness to tell me the truth about Tyler's behavior, even knowing it would cause pain and chaos, saved me from a lifetime of being manipulated by people who claimed to love me but consistently acted in their own interests. The house in Austin feels like home in a way that nowhere else ever has. It's filled with furniture we chose together, artwork that reflects our shared interests, and the kind of comfortable quiet that comes from being genuinely known and accepted by another person. Max's collar jingles as he settles into his favorite spot on the couch, and Rebecca's laughter echoes from the kitchen as she ends her phone call. This is what family is supposed to feel like: safe, supportive, and focused on helping each other become the best versions of ourselves. It took 32 years and a Christmas dinner from hell to figure that out. But the education was worth every difficult moment it took to get here. Tonight, we're having dinner with Jessica and David, who are in town for a conference. We'll talk about work, travel plans, and the future we're all building together. Nobody will compete for attention, manipulate conversations, or expect anyone else to manage their emotional needs. We'll simply enjoy each other's company and celebrate the good things. It's exactly the kind of evening. It's exactly the kind of evening that 20-year-old Marcus thought was impossible. And exactly the kind of future that Rebecca's courage made possible. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the truth, even when it's wrapped in temporary chaos. The butterfly Max has been chasing finally lands on a flower. It's just outside his reach. He sits patiently, tail wagging, content to watch it flutter. Without needing to possess it, some lessons take longer to learn than others.
Yeah.
But the wait is always worth it when you finally understand what you've been searching for all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.